you can understand, I mean, you can understand why Russia is unhappy with this, what is it, 830-odd miles of border now, a NATO border with Finland. However, they've brought this on themselves, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, we can only see this in terms of an own goal. Finland had, for years and years, decades, managed its own relationship with its much, much larger neighbour. And the invasion of Ukraine put a stop to all of that because it suddenly illustrated just how unreliable the modern Russian regime was, and they could do the same to Finland. So, I mean, the effect is that the length of the border between Russia and the NATO countries is now double what it was a few days ago. And there's only one person responsible for that, and that's Vladimir Putin. So that's the 31st member of NATO that's joined, and we hope in the summer there will be Sweden, who will become the 32nd. So, a few years ago, people were talking about, well, how relevant is NATO? Is it old-fashioned and something to do with the Cold War? And what it's demonstrated is that it's incredibly relevant to the new world order and is stronger than it's probably ever been. It's coming up for 75 years next year, and it's as strong as it was on day one.
Finnish people are feeling about joining NATO because they have had a long and uneasy relationship, haven't they, with their big neighbour?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tiny country of, 5.5 million people, but they all do national service. And every large public building has got a sort of bomb shelter in the basement. So they've always been on this sort of sense of semi-military standby, just in case the balloon goes up. I mean, Russia invaded in the Second World War. So this actually takes some of the load off them, because if anything happens again, then it's all for one for all, and the rest of the NATO will pile in and defend them. But I mean, the Russian reaction has been absolute fury. We will take countermeasures. What on earth are they going to do? I mean, nearly all of the Russian army is busy fighting in Ukraine and making an absolute hash of it. There's nothing the Russians can do to threaten Finland at the moment. So Finland's in a very, very strong, comfortable place. It's a win-win for them, and actually it's a win-win for NATO, because Finland is a very strong, militarized, military reliable country. And so this is good news all round.
Well, except, Peter, and we've got to bear it in mind, haven't we, that obviously Vladimir Putin is not the most stable man. He's talked about increasing sort of nuclear armaments along that border as a result. And it's not necessarily just what he might do now, is it, but what he may do in the future if he continues to feel threatened.
Well, here's the message I've been pushing all year, which is that whenever anything happens to Russia's disadvantage, they use the word nuclear, and they hope that they will frighten people into stopping to do something in the West. And the truth of the matter is, right from the word go, when Putin said, I'm going to put my forces on increased nuclear alert, he didn't. Every time he's threatened something, it hasn't transpired. I mean, he talks about stationing forces in additional nuclear forces in Belarus. I mean, let me let you into a secret. They've always been there. They were there in the Soviet days. And to shuffle a few missiles a few miles closer to the West doesn't increase the threat at all, because whatever was in range before remains in range. So, I mean, all of this amounts to absolutely nothing. And I mean, the other thing to say is that, Russia is actually playing by the rules. We don't think about it, but they are. So when President Biden visited Kiev recently, the National Security Advisor was able to phone up Moscow and say, Biden is about to come to Kiev. Don't do anything. Don't launch a missile, because we will take that as a threat against us. So, there are rules that are still being played out between Russia and the West, and we tend not to think about them because of the Russian rhetoric. But that's really all it is. It's rhetoric, it's aggression, because they can't really do very much else.
So Finland has just become the 31st NATO member. Do you think we're going to see other countries such as Sweden or Switzerland, neutral countries, follow suit?
Well, Sweden is neutral, has always been neutral right through the Second World War even. They've, of course, have applied to join. Turkey and Hungary are sort of holding that process up. But we hope by the summer that Sweden will become the 32nd member. I don't think Switzerland will ever take that step. But what is happening around, certainly around Europe and the wider world, is that the old world order of who was on whichever side or neutrality, I think, is being disrupted. I mean, university departments around the world are just standing in amazement at the pace and change of international events and international relations. This hasn't happened since the Second World War, really. We haven't had this amount of change in such a short space of time, so it's difficult to sort of predict where it's going to go. But Switzerland is certainly under pressure to change its closeness to Russia and the way it plays supplying armaments to other countries. And there will be other countries in and around the world, around the fringes of the Mediterranean, and particularly in the Gulf, that will probably feel the same pressure too. So there's more to come. The story isn't over yet in terms of who's on which side.